Hello and welcome back. In this video, I'll be teaching you how to create and update a vendor entry. So let's get started. First, in the main navigation panel, click on the Vendors tab. Once you've clicked on that, in the left navigation, you'll see a tab called Manage Vendors. The Manage Vendors tab will give you a selection of options to choose from. For now, we will choose Vendor Entry and Update. Once the page has loaded, you will see a section on the left of the content panel labeled Active and Inactive Vendors. On the right, you will see a form labeled Vendor Entry or Update. This is where we will be filling out our vendor's information. Before we begin, let's look to see why you would have to create a vendor. You create a vendor for a couple of reasons. 1. You would need a vendor to create a purchase order. And 2. A vendor is required to set up an EDI trading partner to exchange electronic documents such as PO, invoice, ASN, and etc. If you're not familiar with the terms used in each section, don't worry. Orbit has provided a help service called Ask Lola. If there's an input field or term that you're not familiar with, click on the question mark next to it, and a pop-up will explain what the input field is and how you can fill it out. To create a new vendor, you can either click on the small plus icon next to the Active Vendors section or start inputting your vendor's account here. For this example, let's create a vendor entry for Regal Logistics. The vendor account is a unique number that's assigned to the vendor by you. So for this example, let's say that Regal Logistics vendor account is RL1. Once our vendor is typed out, click Tab, and a pop-up will appear saying that RL1 does not exist. Because we're making a new vendor, click Yes. Clicking No will cancel our action to add a new vendor. As you can see, the input fields are no longer grayed out, and now we can begin filling out our vendor's information. First, we have the vendor name, which is the name of the vendor. This is a free text form, so you can enter anything you wish. In this example, we will input Regal Logistics. Website is the website URL of the vendor. This input field is not required, but if the vendor does have a website, make sure to include www. In the URL. For now, we will input www.regallogistics.com. Vendor type lists all the entities used for EDI transactions, such as affiliate vendors, manufacturing vendors, office supplies vendors, transportation vendors, and warehouse vendors. Affiliate vendors are general vendors that are affiliated to your company. Manufacturing vendors are vendors that you order products from. Office supplies vendors are vendors that provide your office supplies. Transportation vendors are vendors that you work with to ship your products. And finally, warehouse vendors are 3PL warehouses that house your products. Regal Logistics is a warehouse vendor, so we will select warehouse vendors as our vendor type. Next, you can change your logo here. You can either do so by clicking on the Browse button or double-clicking on the logo box. Next, choose a picture you want from your computer and then click Open. If you want to remove the logo, click on the Discard button. For now, we will keep this logo. At the bottom of the content panel is the Contact section. Here's where we will fill out our vendor's contact information. First, in the Contacts tab, the contact name is a required input field, so in this example, we will input John Doe. The direct phone number, office number, and fax number are all not required input fields. We will just input 555-555-5555 for all three inputs. Next is the email address. It is not a required input field, so leave it blank if you wish. In this example, we will input info@regallogistics.com. Next, fill out your location's contact address, which is a required field. For the address line 1, we will input 6500 26th Street. Fill out address line 2 if your contact address includes an apartment number or floor number. We will leave this blank. Click on this for a drop-down of all the countries. Scroll through and select the country of your contact address. We will select United States. Next, enter your contact address's zip code. We will enter 98424. Once you've entered a zip code, the city and state or province will appear. Orbit automatically determines which city and state your address lies according to the zip code. Since one zip code can pertain to multiple cities, click on this for a drop-down list of all the cities that pertains to your zip code and choose the correct city. If you attempt to type in a city that doesn't correspond to that zip code, Orbit will immediately notify you. For example, if we input San Diego, this pop-up will appear notifying us that the city and zip code are mismatched. Just click OK and select from one of the cities in the drop-down. In this example, we're given two options, but the correct city that corresponds to this location is Fife, so we will select Fife. Click here for a drop-down of all the states or provinces. Scroll through and select your contact address, state, or province. We will select Washington. Lastly, input the postal code of your contact address here. Leave it blank if you do not have one. In this example, we will leave it blank. You can also add more addresses by clicking here. You can add a billing address, receiving address, a remittance address, a return address, shipping address, and a warehouse address. If your newly added address has the same information as the contact information, at the right of the panel is a button called Same as Contact. Clicking that will autofill fields with the information from the contact section. To remove one of those addresses, simply click on the X button here. Once you finish filling out your vendor's information, at the bottom right of the content panel, click Add New. A pop-up will appear confirming that your vendor has been saved successfully. Just click OK. Your newly added vendor will now appear under the Active Vendors section. You can sort your vendors by clicking on this vendor header. You can sort it alphabetically forwards or backwards. If you want to update your vendor's information, click on the vendor and it will appear in the vendor update form. So if we check Regal Logistics, we can see that our vendor is now given an RxN entity. RxN entity is a number assigned to the vendor by RxN. Also, when you create any EDIs or purchase orders associated with this vendor, the vendor type will be grayed out, but since we just created this vendor, it's not. If you want to delete a vendor, click on the trash can icon. A pop-up will appear asking whether you want to delete it. Click Yes. Clicking No will cancel your action. When we click Yes, the vendor will be successfully deleted and will no longer appear under the Active Vendors section. If you want to disable a certain vendor, for example V2, click on the Disable icon. A pop-up will appear and ask whether you want to disable this vendor. Click Yes. Clicking No will result to no vendor to be disabled. Once disabled, a pop-up will appear saying that the vendor has been disabled. Under the Active Vendors section, you'll see that V2 is no longer listed and is now under Inactive Vendors. If you want to enable the vendor again, go to the Inactive Vendors section and click on the Enable icon next to your desired vendor. A pop-up will appear and ask whether you want to enable this vendor. Click Yes. Clicking No will not enable your vendor. Once you click OK, the vendor will no longer appear under the Inactive Vendors section and should now be under Active Vendors. Also, if you try to create a vendor but you happen to have the same vendor under the Inactive section, a pop-up will appear saying that this vendor already exists but is not active. Click Yes if you want to reactivate this vendor. Clicking No will not reactivate the vendor. When we click Yes, a pop-up will appear saying that the vendor has been enabled successfully. The enabled vendor will be removed from the Inactive Vendors and is added to the Active Vendors section. And there you have it, you learned how to create a vendor entry. I hope this helped you, and I'll see you soon.